Good evening, everyone. Welcome. We're going to give just a few more minutes. We have some attendees still joining, but we're so delighted to see each of you and looking forward to a great presentation this evening. Thanks so much for being with us.
Susie.
We have put you on mute to give the floor to our speakers this evening, but the chat function is enabled. So please feel free if you'd like to drop your name in or exchange messages with one another to do that while we listen to our presentation. I know it's a really fun way to engage and connect. And I see a lot of faces on here that I've seen with a great frequency and also some new ones. So I'm really, really delighted this evening to welcome you all. We're just going to give another minute or two. We have a few more people popping into the waiting room and let them get situated and then we'll get started. It was just a beautiful day here in Roanoke. We are right. One of those days that just makes you super hungry for spring. The birds were chirping, the sun was shining. It was super pleasant to be outside and enjoy lunch in the sunshine. So I know our students were enjoying that time on campus as well. So, well, welcome everyone. For those of you I haven't met, I'm Lauren Walker in Alumni Relations. We are really thrilled to have you here for this informative session this evening and are just delighted to the working group on slavery to be here with us and to give an overview of their work. So thank you again for joining us, and I'm going to allow them to introduce themselves as we go through the program. So Jerry, I will turn it over to you.
Lovely. Good evening. It's so wonderful to see so many of our alumni. I wish we were all in person, but hopefully that's coming next. I'm Jerry Suarez. I'm the Associate Dean of Cultural and Community Engagement and one of the co-chairs of the working group. And it's a pleasure to be with you this evening.
Good evening. My name is Marika Barber. Thank you so much for being here. I'm one of the librarians at the Wyndham Robertson Library, and I am also a co-chair of the working group.
And hello, my name is Rebecca Rosen. I'm a visiting assistant professor in the Department of English, and I am the other co-chair of the Hollins Working Group on Slavery and its Contemporary Legacies. And we also have one of our members here, Sarita Combs, candidate in Alumni Relations. What we're going to do now is a quick presentation that tells you a bit about the history of slavery at Hollins and about the history of our working group. And then that will lead us into a question and answer and discussion section. And we can't wait to speak with you all. All right. So I want to begin today with a land acknowledgement. This is to acknowledge that here in Roanoke and on the grounds of Hollins University, we are on the lands of the Mattapony, Saponi, and Chickahominy tribes, as well as the Monacan Indian Nation. And that we are all part of a larger history here as well. So today we're going to talk about a few different topics: the history of the working group, Hollins history, stories from the archives, some student involvement, and then other initiatives that we're working on or are coming up. So a bit about the history of the working group. So the group was first established in 2016 to address the legacy and future of Founders Day, an annual event held traditionally at Hollins to celebrate the birthday of President Charles Lewis Cocke and the history of the institution. That year, many Hollins students objected to the fact that the story of Charles Lewis Cocke was presented without mention of his and his administration's involvement with the use of enslaved people on the Hollins campus. And out of that protest came a group called the Hollins Heritage Committee, which was formed by President Nancy Gray and chaired by Professor John Boland. Today, the committee is called the Hollins Working Group on Slavery and its Contemporary Legacies. And this reflects our mission to research and educate not just Hollins' connections to enslavement, but the ways in which those connections reverberate throughout our school's history and today. And due to the path-breaking work of alum Brittany Flowers, we've engaged in work on and off campus to identify those people who were enslaved on our campus and address the lasting effects of that injustice. Our group's first job was to come up with a better plan for the aforementioned Founders Day. The result was a 2017 presentation in which all of Hollins history was included. And there were stories and images of African Americans on this campus, starting with those who were enslaved here, The highlight of that presentation was a moment in which Isaiah Sweetenberg, who works at Hollins today, read the words of his ancestor, Clement Reed Bolden, who will be discussed later today. After the presentation, students brought a wreath to hang at our library in recognition of Mr. Bolden and all the women and men who worked on our campus and lived in the nearby Oldfields community. And the day was renamed and is now called Hollins Day in recognition of the fact that we want to acknowledge all of our school's history. So it became clear that in order for this historical reckoning to be an ongoing process, our group would have to continue to work to uncover and share these stories and to right the wrongs perpetrated by previous generations. So some of our past, current, and future initiatives include meeting with members of the Hollins community and Hollins First Baptist Church. And just as a note for definitions, when we say Hollins community during this presentation, we're referring to the community in an area adjacent to our campus, which used to be known as Oldfields. According to Ethel Morgan Smith, that term has an interesting history in connection with enslaved people being housed on land which is no longer used for farming, in other words, the old fields. So what we today call the Hollins community includes direct descendants of those people who were enslaved on campus, worked on campus, and lived in old fields. Faculty have also brought the results of this research into the classroom. In January, a month-long class by John Boland focused on the history of enslaved people at Hollins. And an archaeology project in field school gave students the experience of investigating a site where enslaved people may have worked. And out of this grew also a student group called Students Studying Slavery, who reached out to students at other colleges and universities. In January of the last year, 2020, a course taught by Ashley Bresky looked at evidence of enslavement in our archives, and students produced an online exhibition in conjunction with that. We'll give you a link later today. Also in 2020, a scholarship established for descendants of the Hollins community was publicized. And we've also contributed signage to Hollins First Baptist Church and recognitions of Hollins community representation in that congregation. All right, and let's go to the next slide. Also notable is that Hollins is now a member of Universities Studying Slavery, an international consortium of more than 55 universities, which is dedicated to collaborative research, joint projects, and other activities. This was started in Virginia, but it keeps growing. So now it's an international collaboration, and there are schools close to us like Roanoke College and WNL and Sweetbriar, and as far away as St. Louis and the University of Glasgow. So in April 2018, Hollins hosted the spring conference of USS with 80 attendees from 11 US states in the United Kingdom. And University Studying Slavery really discusses best practices on matters of restorative justice work in terms of process and in terms of progress, on everything from teaching strategies to renaming processes, how to issue institutional apologies for slavery, and what kinds of institutional commitments from memorials to curricular changes to scholarships can create meaningful reparative change. So going forward now, Marika will give us some more about the history of Hollins.
Thanks, Rebecca. While stories of people like Hollins founder Charles Lewis Cock are easily found in published sources, the stories of the Black people whose work sustained Hollins from the early days are not as easily accessed. It's now my pleasure to mention some stories which are being shared more widely. My first subject is Clement Reed Bolden. We know that when he was 17, Mr. Bolden was taken from the Hollins campus and pressed into service by the Confederate Army. We know this because in 1925, Joseph Turner, general manager at Hollins, wrote these experiences down as part of a pension application. That pension application is in the library's archives. Clement Reed Bolden and his family were enslaved by the Reed family. You may remember Reed Mountain. Around 1857, the family came to work on the Hollins campus when Charles Lewis Cock hired them from David Reed. Clem would have been 11 years old at the time. In 1863, he and other enslaved men working at Hollins were taken by the Confederates, and Clem Bolden worked with other Black teamsters to bury dead soldiers after battles. When he was finally able to return, he said he wanted to work with living things, and he was Hollins' head gardener for many, many years after that. Next is Caesar Morton. Mr. Morton was also born enslaved. His family came to Hollins after the war. Mr. Morton worked at Hollins for 67 years, 50 years as Hollins' head waiter. If you'd gone to Hollins, you knew Caesar Morton. Hollins Alumni Quarterly published a long eulogy after he died, along with articles in the Roanoke World, the Roanoke World News, excuse me, and the New York Times also. Students mourned him, but probably did not know much about him outside of Botetourt. He and his wife Betty had 4 children and 11 grandchildren. And together with his brother Nathan, Caesar Morton was the first from the Hollins community to buy and own land in our area. Finally, I wish stories about Black women from this time were as detailed. Sadly, they are not. These fuzzy images on the right are from the 1903 yearbook. Aside from the photo, we have some mention in the Hollins ledger books of what are payments to washerwomen or laundresses. And the information is so very, very sparse. It's a name and the name of the person whose laundry was cleaned. One name we know is Eliza, who appears in the ledgers from January 1865 to 1868. And that is all we know. Now, I should mention that aside from the Hollins archive, one source for the stories that I just told is alumna Ethel Morgan Smith, who interviewed people in the Hollins community and published a book called From Whence Cometh My Help, the African American Community at Hollins College. This book came out in 2000, and some of you may have seen it. Now, I do a very fast forward here to the 20th century. And I want to mention Cecilia Long, who, if I'm not mistaken, is actually with us tonight. And thank you so much for being here. My apologies. I should start with Ms. Mary Emma Bruce, who's on the right. A main source for Ethel Morgan Smith, whose book I just mentioned, was Ms. Mary Emma Bruce. And in her story, we see the experience of a Black staff member at Hollins in the mid-20th century. Ms. Bruce worked as a chemistry lab assistant at Hollins for 46 years in Dana. In addition to her work, she was invited to sit in on classes. She earned all A's, but was unable to get credit for any of this since Hollins was only admitting white students at the time. Now, in 1976, Ms. Bruce was the first African American and the first staff member to be recognized with the Algernon Sidney Sullivan Award for love and great behavior towards fellow employees at Hollins. And in 2004, when she was 95 years old, Hollins awarded Ms. Bruce an honorary degree. Now I should honor Cecilia Long, the first African-American student at Hollins who graduated in 1970. You may also know her name from her service on the Alumni Association Board of Directors and the Hollins Board of Trustees. And we should honor Pamela Mead, who graduated in 1984 as the first Hollins graduate from the Hollins community. Ms. Mead is the great-grandchild of Caesar Morton, whom you met one slide ago. Now, Cecilia Long and Pamela Mead are important firsts. They are certainly not our only distinguished Black alumni, and I want to mention just a few more. There is the Reverend Dr. Cynthia Hale, who is founder and senior pastor of Ray of Hope Christian Church in Decatur, Georgia. Among Dr. Hale's many awards are her induction in the African American Biographies Hall of Fame and the National Urban League's Women of Power Award. Dr. Hale is a current member of the Board of Trustees. And I want to introduce you, if you've not already met her, to Brittany Flowers, excuse me. I mentioned Ethel Smith, and Brittany is another alumna to credit for her work in telling stories of the Hollins community. Brittany wrote her thesis work on the Hollins community. Like Ethel, she gathered stories. She also did a great deal of work gathering genealogical information in an attempt to trace family trees. And her work in that area has been invaluable. I should not neglect faculty and staff. I don't have another slide for this, but I should mention some names. Hollins' first Black administrator was Esther Vassar, who became Assistant Dean of Students and taught English in 1972. There's Judith Hunter, Hollins' first full-time Black faculty member in social work, 1973. There's Hollins' first Black tenured faculty member who appears here. He joined the English department in 1998, and some of you may know Dr. T.J. Anderson III. Now I'm going to turn it over to Jerry.
Thank you, Marika. In the spring of 2020, Professor Ashley Bretsky and her class worked with the Wilson Museum and with archivist Beth Harris On an exhibit of objects will give voice to the stories which have traditionally been excluded from historical narratives. It is now a virtual exhibit called Unveiling the Past, accessible from the museum's website and also from the working group. We would not be able to tell these stories in such authority and detail had it not been for the work of Hollins archivist Beth Harris. And we'd like to acknowledge the tremendous work she did for 3 decades at Hollins. Unfortunately, we lost Beth due to cancer in August. At the moment, the archival research into this history is unfortunately not an option. While Hollins has other librarians, none of them are trained to facilitate and manage this work. We are hoping for permission to fill this position once the hiring freeze has been lifted. Next slide, please. Thank you. By neglecting to talk about the history of enslavement at a pre-emancipation university, we are also neglecting to create a space for the voices of the unheard and making it seem like white voices are the only voices we are willing or able to hear. With projects from the working group, as well as with a variety of classes, like Dr. Boland's class and Dr. Bretsky's, we are creating a space for racial justice and to hear the stories of the enslaved people who built this campus. Dr. Boland's short-term class, Digging into the Past at Hollins, was offered in January of 2020. The first half of the class involved talking about the history of enslavement and racial injustice at the state level. The students were instructed to form groups and travel to a place in Virginia that was tied to enslavement and to research how they portrayed this narrative. Students chose places ranging from plantations to Monticello to Booker T. Washington Memorial. The second half of the class focused on the history of enslavement at the college level, with Hollins being its main focus. Students began working on projects to portray the history of enslavement at our university. Next slide. The walking tour was another project that sprung from Dr. Boland's class, with its main goal being to include a walking tour at orientation, as well as creating an app and a virtual tour to reach as many members of our community as possible. This walking tour would cover the archaeological site behind the library, Front Quad, Carvin, Talo, West Parking Lot, Hollins First Baptist Church, and the cemetery on Plantation Road. The class hoped the walking tour would become part of the orientation to provide a fuller story for incoming students. It could potentially transform campus culture by creating a space to talk about the history of enslavement on campus. It could also set an example for other universities in similar positions and get students involved in this kind of memory work and keep the legacy of this project alive. Again, the goal is to provide a more in-depth history of our past, not to erase what we already know or hide the shameful parts. This project helps in working towards reconciliation of Hollins' past, creating a space for the diversity Hollins prides itself on, and getting students involved in campus culture in a way that is also crucial for racial justice. Next slide, please. The working group has provided material and continues to investigate information for the administration in support of renaming process at Hollins. This includes gathering information about how the process has worked at other universities. Renaming is a complicated process. The campus community needs to be involved as much as possible, with education offered to help people understand why and how this will happen. Members of the working group have held listening sessions in January and February of this year, and we are delighted to hold one next Tuesday, March 16th at 6:30, specifically for all of you, for all of our alumni. So we hope that you'll be able to join us for that discussion. There is a change.org petition started by a Hollins student, Sharday Sudler, to rename Talo Gym. Her petition has almost 1,700 signatures. You can also go to the Working Group on Slavery's website, Click on the links and the articles to see more about renaming. I'll turn it back over, I believe, to Rebecca.
I think Marika.
Or
and then-
Marika, I'm so sorry. It's been a long day, guys. Sorry about
That's
that,
all right.
Marika.
No worries. Thanks so much, Jerry. A little more history. We've been talking about the Hollins community, the people who live there who are descendants of Hollins employees and current Hollins employees as well. And a key feature of this community have been the churches. So in the pre-war years, there were nearby Enon Baptist Church and Mount Moriah Baptist Church. 2 years after the Civil War ended, Green Ridge Baptist was established. This congregation was primarily African American and included a large number of Hollins employees. Green Ridge, remember the name, it will come up again in a moment, split into two congregations in 1892, Ebenezer Baptist Church and Lovely Zion Baptist Church. Ebenezer still exists. Lovely Zion later became Hollins First Baptist Church, which is right next to the campus and an anchor for the current Hollins community. This slide shows a photo of a reunion luncheon of the Hollins community, which the working group hosted and kind of co-organized with the church in 2017. Members of both congregations were among those who attended, Ebenezer and Hollins First Baptist. And it was a wonderful occasion to make acquaintances and hear people sharing family history. Here is another piece of history. The photo on the left is a vacant lot next to the Honey Tree Early Learning Center on Plantation Road, which is, as you know, not far from campus. A few years ago, Dr. Bill Krause in the music department investigated a story that this lot was an old church cemetery. And indeed, he and his wife, Judith Klein, found headstones under the weeds. Dr. Krause's discovery eventually led to the working group's involvement. He located a survey of the site on in the Roanoke County Archives, which confirms it as the cemetery of the Green Ridge Baptist Church. Remember that? With 113 graves on the site. Dr. Krause has convinced county administrators to lend their support. The image on the right is a schematic with suggestions for a restored cemetery, with layout and landscaping developed by the county. The plan includes indigenous plants, a plaque with the names of those we know are buried there, a walkway with a couple of benches, and a state historical marker. Now, Hollins University, Ebenezer, and Hollins First Baptist Church and the county are all interested in moving such a plan forward. First, an issue of the title to the land needs to be resolved. Briefly, Ebenezer Baptist Church has that title, but the county does not have it recorded anywhere. These things are more complicated than they sound. Dr. Krause and Dr. Courtney Chenette, who is in our political science department, another member of the working group and also a Hollins alum, are currently working to make this happen. And I will turn it over to Rebecca.
Thank you. So we also want to talk about two things that are happening. Well, one thing that's happening now and one thing that we want to happen going forward. So one is the scholarship, which I mentioned earlier. And there's a question about the scholarship in the chat, which is great timing. So in recognition of contributions made by enslaved members of the Hollins community, formerly Oldfields, a renewable scholarship is available to the descendants now. This has been available, but hadn't been publicized until last year. You can now find it on the Hollins website, and we can also give you a link to that to see it. The status now is that any descendant can use that to download a form to apply for the scholarship, which will cover all tuition. We are in the process of trying to recruit for it this year. We weren't able to do public events around it, but we would like to very soon. The other thing going forward that we hope will happen soon is that Hollins can issue an institutional apology for slavery. While we have that drafted and we've talked about it with the board and with the president, it requires, again, the presence of an archivist and an outside historical review to make sure that when the institutional apology is issued, which will also include commitments made to Hollins community descendants, that everything in it is verified. And what we're going to do now is go into a question and answer session. I see we already have one question in the chat. We are excited to be in dialogue with you all. In a moment, I'll just read out that question and we can start, but just, you can ask us questions either in the chat or you can unmute yourselves and we'll be happy to answer them. So the first question that was in the chat, aside from the current status of the Descendant Scholarship, is did Hollins actually own slaves? And this is a great question. Hollins is an institution. We don't have any records of the institution itself owning slaves, but we do know that several of its founding members did own slaves and brought them to work on campus. And we also know that the institution rented slaves from nearby slave owners, which was a common practice at the time. And so it was exploiting the labor of enslaved people, even if the institution didn't technically own slaves itself. So thank you for that question. It's in some ways a distinction without a difference, but the difference is in how we apologize when we do, I think. Yeah. And Marika and Jerry, if you want to add anything to that answer, go ahead.
No, I think that's correct. We have some work to do before we can proceed with that. But it's very exciting that we've been able to publicize the scholarship. And that is on the current list of scholarships offered to undergraduates at Hollins on the website.
Mm-hmm. So in terms of, so we have another question in the chat, which is there a website address where all of our classmates can learn of this and how can we help? So in terms of how you can help, the first is by spreading the word. And Marika's just put, I was just gonna, you beat me to it, the link to our website in the chat.
May I give a quick overview of the website just so people know what they can find there? That might be helpful.
Yes, I think that's great.
On our website, first of all, we're committed to complete transparency. So you'll find a list of who's in the working group, contact information, at least for faculty and staff that wouldn't be appropriate for students, and minutes of all of our meetings. If you're excited about reading meeting minutes, we've got them. There's history page with information from previous presentations like this one that we've done. So you can see some more of the information that we've put out. There's a page of links and articles related to the various issues that the working group deals with, examples from other institutions who have groups like ours and processes like ours. There is a page specifically dedicated to the renaming process to inform people what that is and give them more information to consider it. We also have a link to the scholarships page on there as well. Thanks, Rebecca.
Mm-hmm. So our next question is, who owned the ancestors of the current Hollins community, which is entitled to apply for scholarships? We don't know the names of all people who claim to own those people who were enslaved here. We do know that Charles Lewis Cock was one, and that the Reed family was another name. I just want to be reminded. Marika, am I leaving out names that we are aware of?
I believe I may have more information for that, but not at my fingertips. I apologize.
So
I will put
one
my
thing
information
to
in the
note,
chat for
go ahead.
contact. And if people have questions about historical information, I'll do my best to supply with the caveat again that I am not the Hollins archivist and I don't have access to everything. But I'll put my email in the chat in just a moment.
And one other thing to note is that George P. Taylor, who the gym is named after, the people he enslaved weren't necessarily on campus, but he gained a lot of wealth from exploiting their labor, which he then gave to the college. So some of the people whose labor was exploited to provide for Hollins College were not enslaved on campus, but were enslaved by the college's founders and administrators, who then gave that money to the institution. So we're also, some of those descendants are local and some of them are further away or would have been further away. But it was a very, George P. Taylor was one of the largest slaveholders around. huge numbers. So we have another question. Is there any attention being given to the stories of Black graduates from the 70s, 80s, and 90s? And that's a really great question. I think we need to do more work around that, and we also need to do more work with those alumni. Since we don't, the work that we do about the 19th century is, of course, relying on archival sources. But it's important that we center the experiences of living people to tell their own narratives. And to that end, our next question is someone would like to hear from Cecilia Long and Pamela Mead about their experiences at Hollins as some of the first women of color to have matriculated from our alma mater. So if Cecilia Long and Pamela Mead would like to talk about that, then please, we would love to hear from you.
I don't want to talk too much about my experience at Hollins. It was very different, of course, from the way things are now. But I am just really pleased that this project, that this whole working group is established. I think it's so critical to the history of Hollins. I'm from Roanoke, but I didn't know anything about the Hollins community. And while I was on campus, I really didn't know about the extended community of that campus. I had no idea. So this is just fascinating to me. And I know we've got to explore more. I was thinking about the question about descendants. It seems as though if people step forward and say that they know that their family came from somebody who had contact with Hollins, I think that there ought to be some different kind of parameters about which for giving a scholarship. I think we can utilize some different means of giving, not just from the people that we know that were enslaved on that campus or part of that community from our standpoint. But I know when I was at the campus, one thing I do remember, I'll never forget this, is that the dean of students didn't know what to do with me as far as housing. And so she put me in a single room, and all the first year class students kept saying, "Why do you have a single?" And that's what I mainly remember from my first year at the school. And then, and I couldn't explain because I didn't do it. I was the one who was gifted or whatever, or singled out, or not knowing what to do with. I was, the dean of students didn't talk to me, she just did it. And so I got to know people like Ann Compton really well. And I saw that one of the articles that was written was by Cindy Hardwick. She was actually my big sister that first year. She was my leader of my small discussion group. And so when I saw her name, I thought, oh my gosh, Cindy has been writing about this too. So that was exciting. But anyway, that's enough for me. But thank you all. And I'm so glad you're opening this up to anybody. This is really fascinating to me.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I've written down what you said about parameters for the scholarship. Thank you. Pamela Mead.
Everybody. I'd like to say hello, and I'm really sad I didn't know that this group was actually formed, because I would have joined some time ago, because I am in a very interesting position. I know many of the people that you just talked about. I am the legacy of the people that work there, and then I graduated. So I actually had started or resumed a family history project, which I am happy to share any information that I get. And I actually have a wealth of information now that I received from a former graduate, Layla. I cannot think of Layla's last name, but she was the editor of The Spinster. So she had done an article on me when I was about to graduate. And in doing so, she had gathered a lot of information from people in the community and people that were still working there who have passed on at this time. But I guess for me, going to school there was an extension of just who my family was. I had been in and around the campus my whole life because my mother and father worked there. My dad retired the year I started, but my mother, and many of you probably know my mom or remember my mom. She was in the mailroom and she was very chatty. So anybody who was on campus knew her because she was very willing to chat you up anytime. But, I think probably like Miss Long and some of the students who came to the campus after me, there were challenges, but there are also many great people that I met, like Pam and Quincy and Ann, who were all in my class that are on the call now. So I had a good experience because I might have had some of those same experiences anywhere that I went. It's hard to talk and nobody's talking back to me. But I would like for you to replace my picture with Rhonda Jameson's picture, because Rhonda has me probably by about 20 years.
Okay. Well, our sincere apologies for that mishap. I'm going to send you a private message to correct that, but also thank you for sharing this with us and the work that you're doing. And I hope that we all hope that we can work more closely together. And that's one of the hoped for outcomes from these sessions as well. So
sure. Well,
we would love to
it's
work
my
with you.
personal project for my family to put the information together. And I have memories of Miss Emma and Miss Rosa and a lot of the people that you talked about from my own childhood. I remember the first church, which used to sit behind the current church. There was the school. I never went to the school, but there was a schoolhouse that everybody went to. By the time I went to first grade, schools were integrated. So I was the first person in my family to go to an integrated school. Everybody else had at least started at an all Black school. So I think I have a lot that I could share and probably a lot that you could share with me. And as soon as we can get some of these COVID restrictions listed, maybe we can actually get together outside of Zoom, which would make this so much easier.
That would be wonderful. Yes. We were hoping to do some kind of public event last spring, but obviously that we put a pause on putting out the call for that. But hopefully, if not this calendar year, then next spring we can do something like that. Thank you so much for sharing all of that with us.
Rebecca,
Mm-hmm.
may I just chime in for the question, are we connecting with our alums from the 80s and 90s? And I would say yes. And Cecilia Long was so gracious to come and speak at one of our events. I run cultural and community engagement. I've been at Hollins for 35 years. Do we even say that out loud? But I've run this department for 17. And so it has been my distinct pleasure to connect alumni of color with our students of color in the same format that we do C3. We have our own day conference. And because we haven't been able to do that this year, we've been doing it virtually. So our alumni have been so responsive. If there is anyone on this call, I would love to connect with you, because it is that richness that Hollins really represents when we can connect our past with our current. And the students love meeting with our alumni. But Cecilia was so gracious. Cynthia has been gracious, so many people. And so if you are interested in being involved with this, I would love to work with Lauren and you and Susie to make that happen. So that was all I wanted to share. Thank you.
Oh, geez. I think we have another comment in the chat. So Carol Moran says, I love that you're doing a scholarship. It seems like most of the descendants have left the area. Could we not consider scholarship for descendants to attend other schools similar to what we did for male students or faculty members? That is a great suggestion, and we can certainly bring that to the administration. I know we're in talks about opening access not only to women, or people female assigned at birth, but to male descendants or non-binary descendants as well, and also to graduate admission. So I will put that in our notes as well. Thank you. Janet Nicholson, if you'd like to unmute yourself and go ahead and ask your question.
Thank you. Lauren, I was wondering if you could talk about the Black student chapter that has started recently.
The alumni group. There is, and Jerry, I know, and Shion, I think
Yeah.
are on the call. There has been a resurgence. I'm really glad you asked, Jan. When the pandemic began and over last summer, several members of our Black alumni community kind of gathered together and really used technology to their advantage to reconnect with each other. And they have been connecting virtually online. They have an active Facebook group and are very interested and excited to support our students on campus as well. So that is a group that has really just spun out and have been excited to engage in a meaningful way and helping to support this. So it's been really cool. And, you know, as they said, the time was then, and the technology as we're using tonight broke down some of those barriers of them being able to get together and continue the conversations, which was really exciting. And I'll put, there are 4 women who are kind of co-chairing that. I'll put their information in the chat. So in case you all are interested.
I can take the next question from the chat. Let's see, how is Hollins endowing the study at slavery at Hollins for the long term? That is an excellent question. Rebecca shared some of the history of the working group. Essentially, the Heritage Committee, as this group was initially called, was formed to fix Founders Day, right? There was an event, there was a student protest, and so someone needed to fix that. And since the group did initially convince everyone to change the name of that event and the tone and content of that event, and then we kind of refused to go away. So our group still exists, but you should be aware that everyone on that list on our website is volunteering their time and efforts for this. This is not an official university committee, even technically. We do have a good relationship with the president, but we are somewhat unofficial, which is both wonderful in terms of some freedom and difficult in terms of no budget. So at the moment, our efforts are not funded unless there is something specific that we can convince someone to endow us with. We would love to have a stronger basis in the future, and we are talking to the administration about that.
Yes, we're hoping in particular to, in the next couple of years, once we have a new university archivist, to advertise for a postdoc to help certify all of the research that's been done by Brittany Flowers and others about our history, so that then an institutional apology can be made. And then after that, looking forward to more long-term institutional commitments. But yeah, so far we've only had conference attendance sponsored by the administration, which has been very nice. So when we go to the University Studying Slavery Consortium, the administration has paid for that attendance. So that's been good. I think I saw a hand. Did someone want to unmute themselves? Fran Lewis? Here, hold on, let me unmute you. Hold on. Fran, could you unmute yourself? Should be a little microphone on the bottom left. Let's see if I can do this. There you go.
Okay,
Yes.
got it. Yeah, okay. Everyone is speaking primarily of Hollins and Hollins as an educational institution. And have you done any investigation of Hollins as a summertime attraction for people to come to the baths? I mean, from Route 30 all the way up to Bath County, Virginia, they were spread all along there. And some of those locations have excellent history. So if you want to feel for what's going on in that era, you might check that out.
Thank you. You make an excellent point about the fact that that's where the history of the institution starts. And we do certainly have information about that in the archives. And if we go back and want to have a conversation about who built those buildings, then that certainly also becomes relevant to this process. So yes, thank you.
Mm-hmm. And there are some questions about how to get in contact with us and hear about our meetings. To know the most up-to-date information on our events is through our website, but yes, Lauren has been so gracious. She'll send out from Alumni Relations our contact information in an email, so that will be easier to read.
We do also have a contact form on our website. And if you would like, we have a mailing list. When we do something such as today's presentation, we can send out an email to people who are interested in that. So if you'd like to let us know that you'd like to be on that mailing list, the website is also the place to do that.
And you've been so patient. Can you ask us your question?
Yes, hi, good evening. This is Ann Devant, Crehor class of 84, and my classmate Pam Parsons is twisting my arm to tell you this. So thanks, Pam, for the encouragement. In the late summer, I guess, of last year, I was just really struggling with the murder of George Floyd and wanting to do something. And I learned about a 21-day challenge that I thought would be really interesting to do with other like-minded women. So I published something on our class Facebook page and asked people if they would be interested in doing this 21-day challenge with me, which came from Cuesta College out in California. But I found it to be much more manageable than the one by the American Bar Association, which was very intense and very compact. And this one was 5 weeks, and it was a little bit more doable. So there were, I believe, 11 of us that raised our hands in the Facebook group. And you can read all about it in the most current Hollins magazine in the class of 84. I posted it there because I wanted people who are not on Facebook to be able to join us as well. So that led me to think, like, wouldn't it be cool if Hollins came up with its own 21-day challenge and could use some of the great information that you all have already gathered, and sounds like there's lots more to be gathered. So just a thought for Hollins to come up with some things that we can learn about the history of our own school, and then other classes could, of course, join and do that as well. It's been amazing. Some of these women I have honestly not seen in 40 years. So it's been really great.
Thank you for sharing that with us. I think we have one more question in the chat from Linda Webb. Is there a relationship between Hollins and Greenfield? I'm not sure. Do we know anything about that, Jerry or Marika? It's something to look into if we don't.
I don't know if you can hear me, but you know, you were talking about the spas up the line, and Greenfield's just not very far up the line. Of course, it was, I don't think it was a spa, it was a big plantation, but you know, there's the historic Greenfield and the questions of the enslaved people's dwellings and that whole controversy that you may or may not be aware of. I hope you are, since it's so close by. And I personally know family members, descendants of those families, you know, very close by in Botetourt. So I'm just wondering if, rather than just being little islands, we ought to just, you know, have a big a big tent, you know, and be talking to those people, at least, you know, in the same general vicinity.
Mhm. That's a really great point. That's a
So
great point.
I can put you in touch with some key people over there if you'd like.
That would be wonderful.
All righty.
Yeah. I think one of the things we've learned about this research is that it can only get bigger, because whatever's happening here is happening in Virginia, is happening in West Virginia, is happening further south, is happening further north. So all of these places are connected. We don't have anything, I don't think our research and the people who've done research, who we've relied on, have found any connections there yet, but I wouldn't be surprised. And I've noted it as something for us to look into. Are there other questions about what we do or what we're doing going forward? Or we can also open it up to a discussion of how you all would like to be involved, or what you would like us to do to maintain connections with our wonderful alumni community. How would you like to be involved in this work, and what kind of work would you like to see going forward? We can certainly do another session in a few months. We can keep doing these sessions, of course.
My name is Joyce Wood. I can't find the hand to raise my hand here, so I'm going to do it, really. I'm the class of 67, and we didn't have any African Americans in our class, but I remember that before I left, which was, I stayed 4 years, although I was in France for a year, there was the first African American person I remember coming to Hollins was from the Virgin Islands, which I thought I'd come from New Jersey, and my school was integrated. So I thought it was kind of odd that they had to go all the way to the Virgin Islands to get somebody. But so there is someone sometime in the late 60s, who was there from the Virgin Islands, who was of African descent. And I can't remember who that was because she was young. She wasn't in my class. I'm sure my yearbook must have it, one of my yearbooks. So.
All right, thank you. There's also a request to hear about funding initiatives in this area, to hear about projects periodically. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And Lauren, do they all have the information to be able to join us on Tuesday? And we can continue our discussion?
Shared the link, and we'll share it again. We are doing a listening session on Tuesday evening, and we'll drop that back in the chat so you can sign up to come and be part of that conversation. And we'll also send, as you all saw, this session is being recorded, so we'll be able to share it with everyone who registered, but then also on our virtual events page. And finally, to stay connected, we're going to compile all of these resources and email addresses, and we'll send all of that out to everyone on this so that you all can stay in the loop. I know lots of requests to have this conversation a little bit with more regularity, and I think that's great, and very open to that. So thank you all so much for making time and joining us this evening, Marika, Rebecca, and Jerry, and a special treat to have Cecilia and Pamela with us. Thank you for sharing and opening up. So really great to see everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. We'll get that message out before the end of the week. So look for those links, and everyone stay safe and well, and take care. Thanks again.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all for coming.